playing tennis, and why?
I was 10 years of age. A friend of mine joined the local tennis club. It cost $1 a year for a junior membership, and he was my best friend at the time, so I went home and told my mother I had to have $1 to join the tennis club also.
So you go out to the tennis club and then you got lessons?
No, four of us, two other friends who were already members of the tennis club, the four of us went and played in the off-season all winter long, every afternoon after school, and we were the only people there because in those days you had a tennis season which ended at Easter, and then the nets were put away, so we had to have a key to a box to get the net out of the box and then put the net up on the court, and then at the end of the game we would take the net down, put it back in the box, lock the box.
Why would you take the net down? Why wouldn't they just leave it up all the time?
They thought that the nets would last longer. These were very thin nylon nets that only covered about half the space between ground and the top of the net, and so they thought they would last longer. This was not a very rich club, and so they thought the nets would last longer not being out in the winter weather, when nobody used them anyway.
So you had a few friends that played?
There were four of us.
Okay. And you ended up better, I assume, a better player than the other three.
I got, two of us quickly got ahead of the other two, and then the other guy, he remained better than me through about 12. And I probably went past him at between 12 and 13.
What was the difference between you and them?
Basically, probably well, in hindsight, I probably ran better. And also I never stopped trying.
And then you kept playing, you started playing. When was your first junior tournament?
At 11, so about a year and a half after we started, then I played in a novice event at a junior tournament. After you played 2 tournaments, you're no longer eligible for novice. And my first match, I lost the first game to Love, the second game to 15, the third game to 30, the fourth game to Juice, and won the rest.
So were there tournaments like every weekend in Tasmania, or a certain number?
The next tournament I played was the same place a year later. Then the following year I went and played in the May and the September school holidays. We had 3 school terms in a year. They had the schoolboy championships in the May holidays and again in the September holidays. So then at 13 I played those for the first time.
Did you get any coaching in the juniors?
No. No, I was totally self-taught.
Okay, so were there coaches around and you just didn't get with them, or?
There was a coach in a neighbouring town 30 miles away, but we didn't have much money, and for one thing, and I probably was in no position. I probably wouldn't have listened anyway, because I just wanted to play. So I recognise that in some of our kids here. They don't want instruction, they just want to play.
So how did you come to the United States?
I went to Wake Forest on a tennis scholarship, and back.
How did they find you?
Other Australians had come to school over here, to college over here, and the coach at Wake Forest, he heard about an Australian called Carl Coombs who was at Oklahoma City University, and Carl was unhappy there, so Coach Layton at Wake Forest tried to find him over. He was playing summer tournaments throughout the South, and Layton tried to find him to say, well, you can transfer to Wake Forest. And Carl I think he got to about 110 in the world, so he finished up being pretty good. And by the time Coach Layton tracked him down, Carl had already settled his differences with the coach at Oklahoma, and so had gone back there. Was going back there. So Coach Layton asked him, well, how do I get an Australian? And Carl gave him the name of a local tennis administrator, and he happened to be the same guy that had organised for me to move from Tasmania to Sydney, thinking that I could be a decent player, but he had bad judgment. He was found to be wrong, and so that guy was the person that he brought up about how a bunch of guys, there were 5 guys from Sydney where I was living at the time, playing at Oklahoma City, and so he was telling a group of us how these guys were doing, and because they were all my age, and mentioned that he didn't have any. One coach, which happened to be Coach Layton, kept ringing him up in the middle of the night, not knowing there was a time difference, and he didn't have any players to send him. So I suggested myself.
How long did you live in Sydney?
5 years.
So did you live in like an academy setup, or?
No, I was boarding with at a private house. You rented a room, and a lot of people did that, including tennis players, kids from the country that came to the city, and tennis players in particular that I knew of. Country kids would, tennis officials would spot them in the country and say, well, to have a chance of being a better player, to develop, you'd have to come to the city. And so that happened a lot in both Sydney and in Melbourne. And so they found a place for you to stay, which at a house. Generally it was a house that had a tennis player in the family. But you were totally on your own as far as organising games of tennis, getting yourself on tennis teams. There were a lot of leagues, like similar to what the USTA leagues are now. There were, you could play league tennis then, pretty much 5 or 6 times a week.
So
at night after work or on the weekends.
So you moved to Sydney. They say move to Sydney. Yes. That was the suggestion, but they didn't have any structure for your tennis once you got there.
No. They had all these existing leagues, and there were a few tournaments a year, like 3 or 4 tournaments maybe a year that I would play.
Was anyone like watching out for you, like tracking your game, or
no.
saying? Well, who suggested you move to Sydney then?
This same administrator. He saw me playing well. We had the national clay court championships revolved between states, and Tasmania had its turn, and I played well in that tournament, and I beat a couple of top-ranked players, top-ranked in Australia-wise, and played Tony Roach in the quarterfinals, and I played in my best match possibly of my life then, and he thought I could do it again and do it over and over, but right. I proved him wrong.
So, how old were you when you moved to Sydney?
I was 19, just turned 19.
Okay, so you didn't go to Wake Forest until you were 24?
Correct.
So then you go to Wake Forest, and then you played for, I guess, a legendary coach.
Yes.
What made him...
Well, he was a legendary teacher.
Legendary teacher,
yeah.
Okay. So what made him different than other teachers?
I think he was meticulous. He would, I in particular hooked on to wanting to be a tennis teacher once I tried it, and he would, have exactly where all the parts of the body should be at every step of a stroke. And so he was very particular on, balance, but this is the position your left arm is, your right arm is, your left leg is, your right leg is, where your shoulders are. He was very, he was very, very careful about all the little details. And so I picked up on that. I spent so much time. If I had spent as much time on the court practicing as I did spend learning how to teach, I might have been a half-decent player at Wake Forest.
So you were receptive to him in learning what he knew about teaching.
Yes.
Were you receptive as a player also to what he was trying to get you to do?
No, not really. He didn't try to mess with... My backhand was a fairly good shot, and so he didn't mess with that at all. Although after my first year, all I could do was hit drive backhands. He suggested I learn how to chip. But he didn't really instruct me on that, just suggested that's what I should do. But my forehand was horrible, and so he did spend a lot of work trying to teach me a forehand, but he failed at that, and I wasn't particularly interested in learning it anyway.
And back then, the Wake Forest team and Jim Layton were in the community.
Once you arrived, you on a right away on a Thursday, you went down to Haynes Park, the public courts, and you worked with the kids there. That was, I just figured that was part of what you did in college.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know till later that we were the only college that I knew of that did that. And then in the fall, you did more work in the community.
So if he's meticulous, and when you get there on that Thursday, he's getting you to work with the kids,
Mm-hmm.
then he wasn't concerned about you being meticulous or you doing a certain thing, I assume.
Well, often we would be in charge, at first we would be in charge of basically hitting with kids, and he would be on another court giving them free lessons. We would rotate through.
Okay.
Then I think after my first year was when Mildred Southern, when I told her that the way she was running the junior programs there wasn't going to be any good, she said, "Will you be in charge?" So after that I was in charge of groups.
Okay. And how long did you work at Haynes Park then?
We were going down there for 4 years, but pretty much at Haynes Park was about 1 day a week, and I would go to other more low-income area courts, and you'd give clinics to kids that were in the neighbourhood, and also I'd have a series of lessons with some kids at courts in like South Winston-Salem and East Winston-Salem.
So then after college, or was it during college that you started teaching at Sherwood?
No, that was my summer job.
Okay.
For 4 years.
Okay, and Jim Layton arranged that for you?
They called up Jim and wanted somebody for the summer pro. In those days, the only full-time pro at the time was Jim Winstead at Greensboro Country Club. Everyone else was just a summer pro.
So when you spent summers at Sherwood, did you teach the whole time, or were you able to play and keep your game up too?
No, I didn't play at all. I taught about 30 hours a week. Well, I limited myself to 30 hours, so I taught 30 hours a week.
And is that mainly group or private?
No,
or?
there were a couple of groups, but nearly everything was individual. Basically, they would, I was being a foreigner and being a college player, that kind of like maybe was a draw card. And also Coach Layton had told a few top juniors in town, Carlton Harris, Hunter Dortch, Bill Steffens, like they would come, and that probably, with those guys coming over to Sherwood, then, that became a tennis place in town.
How has your teaching deviated from Coach Layton?
Well, ground strokes, it was all one-handed backhands then, so that's, now we pretty much only teach one-handed slices. We don't teach one-handed drives. And so the two-hander, wasn't around. The forehand has changed completely from an Eastern forehand with a linear swing to a semi-Western forehand with a circular swing, so you've had to change completely the way of teaching the forehand and had to learn how to teach a backhand, two-handed backhand. Volleys pretty much, and slice pretty much hasn't changed.
But stylistically, are you as attention to detail as he was? Do you?
Probably of all the people that he taught how to teach. I'm possibly the most like him.
You were at Sherwood, and then where'd you go from there?
I went to Chapel Hill Tennis Club.
And you were the...
I went there like I had a day after my last exam to get there to start work. And I was appointed as the manager, the tennis director, the head tennis pro, and the accountant. I'd done accounting courses. The 7 years between high school and coming to Wake Forest, I worked in an accounting firm.
Did you ever think about doing something outside of tennis?
Not once, probably about a week into being at Sherwood, no.
Okay.
After about, if I didn't have, I would have stayed at Sherwood or got a full-time job as a tennis teacher somehow. Probably between Haynes Park and Sherwood I could have done that. After about a week in, I realised that's what I wanted to do, and so never thought about a non-tennis job. I didn't realise you could earn a living as a, the only coaches I knew around my area in Sydney were part-timers. They had regular jobs and were part-timers. So it was and I also didn't realise they would pay you to organise tennis. In Australia, all the organising of tennis was done by volunteers, and I'd done a fair bit of that before I came over here. So the fact that I knew how to organise a round robin or a mixer or something like that was rather unique for a summer tennis pro. That's a big reason why Sherwood tennis boomed, was because somebody knew how to organise a tennis event, and they'd been used to having somebody who just taught lessons.
If you never would have left Tasmania, what job do you think you would most likely have had?
Well, I probably would have, and maybe eventually would have passed a few accounting courses, and being a bookkeeper for somebody.
So you've taught a lot of students. Are there traits that you think are the most important for a student to succeed in tennis?
I used to divide the game of tennis into 4 categories. One was technique, one was the, so I thought 20% of it was technique, 20% of it was general athletic skills, 40% was desire, and 20% was character. And that probably still applies. But I kind of had that, concluded that, maybe 40 years ago.
So, if you had 5 lessons to teach in a day, your last day teaching, who would your students be? If you could pick your students throughout your career, who are the top 5?
Oh, you mean over my whole career?
Yes.
I would have to give that some thought. Well, are you talking about the best player or the ones you like to teach the most?
Ones you like to teach the most.
Ones I like to teach the most, okay. At Chapel Hill there was a kid, Peter Schweitzer, and there was a girl who had 0 coordination but fantastic desire, Adelaide Wilcox. And let's see, I had a lot of really good pupils at Sherwood. While I was at Sherwood, we had about 5 state champions, people like Jane Pryor, Hunter Dortch, Basie Hendricks, Jimmy Neal, Bill Steffens. At Piedmont, Stephen Enix, he was always so dedicated, so listened, tried whatever he couldn't, not necessarily do whatever you wanted to, but he tried to do it. Well, in the current program, there's so many of them that I look forward to teaching. That's, Brianna's just a standout kid and a standout tennis player. The other kids, Amber Fuller has a great personality, but almost 0. No, I've never got to 0 focus, but she got, down to 15% of the time she would focus. But she was always fun. working with somebody like Braden who picks things up so quickly, you know, you often feel like, well, gosh, what do I do for the rest of the time, because he's already got it. So you don't really have to work at that very hard. You know, but kids that, you know, a kid like Reese who tries really hard, you know, she's always fun to teach, and although she might start asking a lot of questions about things nothing to do with tennis, so getting her to focus for an actual whole half hour. She's very good for about 20 minutes and then zero you for about 10 minutes of every half hour. I know I like, you know, the schedule I've had this year, because I've had a bigger say in who I teach now, and since we started on basically trying to do as much of what they need when they need it, you know, you've always got lessons that you say, oh, there's definitely something we can do today, rather than, well, what am I going to do with this kid today? And so, you know, yeah, that's, I would have to sit down and work out the top 5.
Looking back, if you could change anything about your tennis career, what would you change? What would you have done differently?
I would have worked on being a tennis player more while I was at Wake Forest, and tried to probably try to continue playing some between, like from when I left Wake Forest, I basically didn't hit a ball apart from going to a few tournaments where I went to socialise until I was like 42. And then I basically stopped teaching all but the better kids when I turned 40, and didn't teach any more beginner classes after that, and or intermediate classes. And then I got an interest back in hitting some balls again, and it took me a couple of years before that happened. And so looking back, I don't regret anything I did do while I was in college, but I should have put in more effort into being a tennis player when I was at Wake Forest, as opposed to being a tennis teacher and socialising.
All right, Jim, well, thank you for the interview.
All right.
The first one. What do you know to be true that most people would disagree with you?
I'd have to think about that one. Most of the things that I think are true, other people are in agreement with me. So I don't think that there's a few exceptions to that. You know, there are some people that disagree with you on everything, just as you know, because that's what they do. I really thought was the right thing to do that nobody else agreed with me.
All right.
That's a good question.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a Peter Thiel question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.